As a layperson, perhaps you can enlighten me. What therapeutic effect would the type of experiment that I just described have on a patient?
Well, the therapeutic effect would be indirect.
Was this patient aware that she was being given LSD?
Yes, I mean, they were told that they would be given some medications, and they should have...
Specifically LSD?
Well, we told them, I don't think that they would have even known what LSD was then at the time. They were told that they were going to they would be given some medication which might make them feel worse.
Dr. Monroe, what do you think the Army Chemical Corps was looking for in all of this testing?
They were looking for an incapacitating agent, an agent that would not harm the person permanently, but would incapacitate them temporarily. That seemed like a humanistic way to to wage a war, if war is necessary.
When James Thornwell was given LSD by Army intelligence in 1961, this time it was no experiment. This time the expressed purpose was to peel back Thornwell's brain to bear any secret within it. This time the Army had gone operational. Thornwell was an Army private stationed in Orléans, France. Classified documents were reported missing from his unit. Thornwell became a prime suspect. His 2.5-month interrogation included administration of sodium pentothal, hypnosis, isolation, and deprivation of sleep. Army documents obtained by ABC News refer to this interrogation as conventional. Despite this severe questioning, Army intelligence was getting nowhere with Thornwell, and it was decided to slip him LSD. For 16 years, Thornwell never knew what had hit him.
It looked like I had craters off in my head. You know, I could see needles flying by, just big bursts of light just going by and burst. Every time they burst in color, the pain was so excruciating. It felt like somebody was sticking me with 1,000,000 pins, you know, just everywhere. Oh, it just...
Want something?
I walked around.
Want something?
Oh, I can talk. I lived through it. I lived through it. I lived through it.
No charges were ever brought by the Army against Thornwell. He was discharged for psychological disorders. But an Army psychiatric evaluation of Thornwell obtained by ABC News, one which was done prior to Thornwell being given LSD, says of him, fairly cooperative, oriented, alert, and gave no evidence of psychosis or depression. Thornwell still has serious problems. He's run through 2 marriages. He maintains he can't hold a job, can't concentrate, has nightmares, and feels socially and emotionally isolated. By far, the most chilling experiments we have uncovered took place at this Gothic estate known as Ravenscrag, halfway up Mount Royal in Montreal. It now houses the Allen Memorial Institute of Psychiatry of McGill University. It was here that the CIA funded a series of experiments, severe experiments, the details of which have never been made public. A joint investigation by John Marks and ABC News finds that this was the closest experimentation to brainwashing that has yet been disclosed. The work was done by the Institute's then director, Dr. Ewan Cameron. Val Orlico of Winnipeg, Canada, the wife of a member of the Canadian Parliament, was a patient of Dr. Cameron's. She entered the Allen Memorial Institute because of severe depression.
To look in the nurse's window to see what was written down on various things on the desk. And I saw my name on a form, and there was a prescription there, and it was for lysergic acid diethylamide 25. And I thought, what in hell is that? So Dr. Cameron came in the morning and administered the drug, and we were off. And then the drug began to take hold very rapidly because it was an IV injection. And things became very furry and very frightening, and had a lot of sensations that it's very difficult to recall. And it seemed to me that it went on for hours and hours and hours. I had several sensations. I was a squirrel in a cage. I was Alice who'd taken the wrong pill and suddenly grown very small, and I couldn't get off the bed, and what was I going to do? How was I going to get the pill that would make me larger again? And at least once, and sometimes 3 times a week, I had these injections for a period of approximately 2 months. And they were very, very frightening. They were very disagreeable. I thought it was all some sort of very different type of treatment, but certainly a helpful treatment for me. I didn't know anything else about it. Nobody explained it to me. Nobody ever asked me if I was willing to do it or anything.
He had this feeling that he would be able to get through the resistance of illness and to reach deep changes very quickly.
Did he?
I don't think that when you look at that in retrospect, the hopes that he had have been in any way fulfilled.
But Cameron would plunge on. The next step was what he called psychic driving. This involved almost endless tape-recorded messages and more drugs for the patient. Cameron wrote that this was the way to make direct controlled changes in personality.
I thought this was the coldest and most impersonal treatment that anybody could give to anybody in the world. And I became more and more despondent and more angry. I mean, my strongest emotions were hostility and apathy. And I finally began to think, I don't care about anything, nothing matters. I just became so despondent that I thought I can't live like this any longer.
The most severe technique Cameron used was de-patterning. He described it as breaking up the existing patterns of behavior by means of intensive electroshock therapy with prolonged periods of sleep. He carried out these experiments in something he called the sleep rooms.
People in there were like babies. They cried and they were very disoriented. And we were very afraid of the sleep room. We used to walk very carefully against the side of the corridor that was opposite the sleep room with our backs to the wall when we'd go by.
Cameron used this combined sleep electroshock treatment on patients as long as 30 days. One patient he kept asleep for 65 days. Cameron retired, and his successor, Dr. Robert Cleghorn, ordered a follow-up study on the patients treated with Cameron's de-patterning method.
It showed that it was no more beneficial in its result than the use of more conservative methods.
But the follow-up study showed that 60% of those who had been de-patterned still had amnesia for periods of anywhere from 6 months to 10 years. That's quite a memory loss, isn't it?
That is a memory loss. Indeed it is. It's I think, more than desirable.
In retrospect, does Dr. Cameron's experimentation and his treatment appear harsh?
I would say yes. This forceful type of approach, as I was describing to you, it is definitely, it can be said that it's harsh.
I wouldn't call it harsh. I would say it was harder on the staff than it was on the patients, because these people had to be fed and they had to be cared for and they had to be given sufficient fluid and food and toileted and so on and so forth. It was a very difficult thing for the staff to follow these patients properly and see that they did well.
Well, I'm glad he was concerned for the staff, but I think it was harder on the patients. When I found out about the experimental research that it really was, I was really quite outraged. I mean, I couldn't believe it. How could anybody? I mean, I was just outraged. I was angry and I was outraged, and I thought, all these people who've been hurt and nobody was ever helped by any of this damn stuff and all the misery that I at least went through. And it was as though it was like a missing link. This is why I never got better. But damn it all, I wouldn't. I could have maybe had a different kind of life. And that makes me angry and sad, and I don't know how to explain how I feel, really. I'm just
How did you feel when you learned that Dr. Cameron's experimentation was financed by the CIA?
Well, I thought, I can't even use the word that I thought, because I thought, that bastard. And I think it's inhuman. I don't know what kind of people could cause this to be. I really don't. I feel very strongly about it. I realize the CIA is a very important organization and they have a very important job to do. But God, it surely doesn't have to be done on people who are totally incapable of knowing what's happening or having any defense against it. And I can't imagine the mentality of people who would do this. I just can't.
As for Dr. Cameron, he died in 1966 while mountain climbing. A colleague wrote of Cameron, "For him the ends justified the means. And when one is dealing with the waste of human potential, it is easy to adopt this stance." Dr. Cameron seemed ideally suited for what the CIA had in mind.
Normally conditioned American who's been trained to kill and then to have no memory of having killed. His brain has not only been washed, as they say, it has been dry cleaned.
The Manchurian Candidate, a programmed robot American assassin created by the communists. Was it possible? It was the Cold War, and especially the trial of Joseph Cardinal Mindszenty, who was forced to testify in a Hungarian court that he was a spy. And then later, the Korean War, with the coerced and mainly fraudulent confessions of American servicemen.
My germination took place on the...
That would spark intense interest in intelligence circles about brainwashing. John Gittinger, former chief psychologist for the CIA.
There was widespread anxiety in the armed forces and in the higher government level that somebody was really developing some kinds of techniques that were being used to get people to reform in certain ways. And therefore, there began to be quite a concerted effort to try to see if we couldn't get a better handle on just what the process of brainwashing was.
The CIA secretly commissioned a study of Chinese and Russian methods at the Cornell University Medical Center.
Communist brain.
The leader of that study was Dr. Lawrence Hinkle, who had been observing Soviet methods back to the Stalin purges and the Russian show trials. What were the Soviet methods of breaking an individual?
You're detained. You're detained, however, in fact, totally detained, absolutely isolated from everyone else, with one man whose job it is to get you to write the extent to which you are a criminal. In this setting, you can get people to do most anything, do you see? Because you don't have to lay a hand on them. You can use anxiety, you can use isolation, you can keep them awake, and by the time you get through and you go up before the judge, the fellow says, "Were you a spy?" He says, "Yes, I was a spy."
Well, the purpose of the Cornell study was to find out about communist brainwashing techniques. CIA documents indicate that the agency was interested in developing mind control methods of its own. Another CIA-sponsored study at Cornell was designed to test ways to control nationalist Chinese living in this country. What were you looking for? What did you find?
All right, well, I'll tell you about that. Our friends in the Central Intelligence Agency were interested in having some Chinese nationals tested with these tests, while at the same time examined by a group of psychiatrists and sociologists and psychologists.
For the agency's perception of the work you were doing, in CIA documents we have examined, it says that the project that was being done here they intended to use everything learned about the new agents to induce them to, quote, to perform acts of a complex, purposeful nature.
Yeah, but that was
the
never
effects
done.
of which may be out of keeping with the individual's
That
previous
sort of
behavior.
thing was never done. Those people were not, that was, when they first came here, the first people they sent up to see us, you see, were operational type people from the CIA with some rather wild ideas.
Our documents clearly show that the CIA was attempting to develop agents over whom they had as much control as possible. Agents who would perform tasks contrary to their own good.
We were lost on the patrol. Do you recall what happened to them?
Yes, sir. It was a very clear action for a night action.
Is a Manchurian candidate, controlled by others to do things against his will, possible?
It was a remarkable film because, as far as I'm concerned, it made something totally impossible seem absolutely credible.
That sort of thing always struck me as more science fiction than fact.
I would say the answer is yes, but there are many qualifications to that.
Dr. Milton Klein, a psychologist, a clinical and experimental hypnotist, and unpaid consultant to the CIA.
The qualifications would be the subject selected to produce the kind of behavior that you wish, the amount of time, the procedures that are utilized, and the motivations of the people who are designing, executing, and administering the procedures. You're asking whether an individual can be, under hypnosis, influenced, coerced, persuaded, shaped to perform an antisocial act, or a destructive act, or an act of violence. My answer would be yes.
Captain Marco, will you be good enough to lend Raymond your pistol, please?
Yes, ma'am. Thanks, Ben. Sure, Ken.
Case reported by Dr. Paul Reiter, who was the chief psychiatrist at Copenhagen General Hospital, where a criminal hypnotist, being confined to a jail cell, found his cellmate to be a very susceptible subject. He trained this subject to eventually commit a robbery and a triple homicide, which were successfully carried off.
How valuable a tool can hypnosis be in the intelligence field?
None whatsoever. It has absolutely no use because nobody's ever been able to do that I know of, to do it in an operationally feasible way. I'm not in any way saying that hypnosis doesn't take place. I'm not saying there's nothing to it.
I confirm from both CIA documents and interviews that from 1960 to 1963, James Angleton in the counterintelligence part of the CIA was very interested in hypnosis and indeed was carrying out operational experiments. The counterintelligence men thought it might be possible to make a breakthrough in the whole clandestine business, and they thought that hypnosis offered a great deal of promise.
I would say that most government agencies concerned with intelligence operations have been looking to hypnosis as a tool for a variety of purposes, one of which is to carry out and to execute certain intelligence operations on a basis where they would not have to rely completely on some of their own emotional reactions. Actually, they're entail murder. It could, if you consider that an act of killing someone under circumstances of war is murder. I think one has to define what that means.
Under circumstances of peace.
Under circumstances of peace, it would be murder.
Another former CIA agent says that potential targets of a possible Manchurian candidate were considered. One of the targets was Fidel Castro. The agent did not wish to be filmed or recorded. His remarks are read by someone else.
Castro was naturally our discussion point. Could you get somebody gung-ho enough that they would go in and get him?
But it was decided that a Manchurian candidate was not feasible. Is predictable absolute control of an individual possible?
I would say no. Predictable absolute control of an individual in any way, under any condition, is not absolutely so.
Is that clear?
While the Manchurian candidate may not have been feasible, the search would continue for ways to predict and manipulate human behavior, and some would be successful.